Good afternoon, viewers. Of late, you have been viewing a lot of our sessions live on LinkedIn. It is perhaps one of the most effective tools we have found to connect with our community members and also to instantly disseminate valuable content. In this special telecast today, we have a LinkedIn Live session on the secure managed cloud, how security is important for a successful cloud implementation. Now, before I begin the conversation with our expert today, I thought it will be prudent and good to give you a slight background. Of course, cloud is undeniably one of the most promising technology blocks to complete the digital transformation story for any organization. Lately, due to the unprecedented situation that has emerged due to COVID and lockdown, it became even more compelling and promising. Uh, 64% of Indian enterprises expect to increase demand for cloud computing as a result of COVID 19, says IDC. Another very credible data point from Gartner says that end user spending on public cloud services in India is forecast to a total of around $3.5 billion in this year, which is coming to an end, of course. Deployment of public cloud can add around 100 billion US dollars worth to the Indian economy and has the capability of generating 2.4 lakh jobs directly by 2023. That's being published by Google and Boston Consulting Group report. Um, Another interesting data point is that public cloud market in India will reach the $8 billion mark by 2023. So all of these indicators are good enough to understand that cloud has now grown its clout. The ever-evolving IT landscape in today's context requires a flexible and dynamic operating environment, which means a highly optimized IT infrastructure that can come handy in implementing and embracing digital transformation and can also scale business operations in a growth-oriented business. Taking into account the growing business requirements, the foremost consideration for organizations opting for cloud would involve having a sound information security system in place. Migrating infrastructures, migrating applications, or even services require a very careful understanding of the ensuing security implications that are aplenty. Cloud-based deployments have significantly changed the security paradigm and of course requires companies to deploy a consistent security framework that spans the entire cloud infrastructure. Also, cloud has become a critical component of IT and business as the workforce has shifted to remote locations and next generation technologies and initiatives such as digital business, customer intimacy, and artificial intelligence have become a reality. So the organizations planning to embark on the journey to cloud, or in both in terms of migration and implementation, should first gain a very clear understanding of the process involved in it. They should know the requirements that should be considered for a safe cloud migration or secure cloud implementation. Let's straight away go into our LinkedIn Live session today, where we have with us Sridhar S. Sridhar is the Vice President, Cloud and Security Services, Tata Communications. Sridhar will talk about all of the aspects that I have mentioned about the cloud computing and more. Welcome, Sridhar. Welcome for this LinkedIn Live session.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for the introduction.
So let's straight away get into the pointers that I had for you, and you can actually answer them and elaborate your viewpoint. So let's first discuss something of the common myths and misconceptions around cloud implementations, especially in terms of its security. What are the key areas that generally get overlooked when people talk about cloud implementations?
Today, like you rightly pointed out, Rahul, cloud has become the anchor and the cornerstone of every organization's infrastructure. And as you look at it, cloud plus security are conjoined twins. You cannot think about one without the other. Now, the one biggest challenge that I notice in the myth is I have handed over this responsibility to somebody else and they will take care of it. To me, that is the biggest myth surrounding this. And it can break into different elements. Say, for example, today, any organization, one of the data points says that organizations use almost 4 different clouds at any point of time. It could be a cloud provider, it could be a public cloud infrastructure provider, or the like. Now, when you are looking at this kind of an infrastructure implementation, it could be an infrastructure as a service provider, or it could be a SaaS provider as well. They could be leveraging the SaaS application from somewhere. So an infrastructure provider is only going to look at just a physical infrastructure based security. Similarly, a SaaS provider leverages the identity as well as the access controls that are being defined by the organization in their IT. And they are just going to mirror that and implement it. And there's going to be a lot of files being shared, a lot of data being shared, and there are going to be lots of users. Now, when you look at these two together, none of them points to an ownership of the security as is defined by the organization. An IaaS provider or a SaaS or a PaaS provider clearly only acts to what the organization defines, which means clearly the ownership rests with the organization. It is a concept of shared responsibility where, to the level of infrastructure or to the level of application services that they provide, they would give the foundation elements of the security. But on top of it, the organization which is using that infrastructure or using that application has to build with it. Now, this is with respect to what is from outside with a infrastructure provider. Second is it could also be from a outsourced security partner for the organization. It could be an MSSP, it could be an MDR provider, it could be a simple security operations management partner. Now, even there, the partner is going to provide the people, the process, and the technology to be able to implement as to what are the security controls are required as defined by the organization. Now, when it comes to, for example, a data management, how the data is going to be classified, how much and how far is the access going to be provided, is not something that's going to come from a provider or external source. It's going to come from how the organization defines it. Right? So, also, the CSA has defined egregious level. Of that, two important elements that impact an organization's security are the identity related challenges as well as the application and the data related challenge. Now, these, the misconfigurations as well as the wrong utilization, both from external sources as well as insider threat, are two of the most important challenges. And again, the ownership here is shared with the provider as well as the organization. So that's the second part. Thirdly, even within the organization, it's not as if we've got a bunch of information security professionals who are going to provide the complete air cover needed for the entire organization. No, it's the responsibility of each individual, you and me, as we use our infrastructure. For example, today in the work from home environment, I could have a bad router at my house, which doesn't subscribe to the organization's definition of what a secure router is, and that could become the whole which impacts my whole organization. So constant user readiness, user training, as well as their own participation into the security becomes important in today's work from home and rather work from anywhere kind of an environment. So it's not just that a bunch of professionals are hired and they've defined a policy and everything is going to work to clockwork precision. Most certainly no. Every person contributes to it. And then lastly, the other thing that comes about is successful breaches happen only with sophisticated attacks. No, the attacks are sophisticated, yes, but when you use something or when you leave certain resources, or for example when a device, the person has accessed it or the person has left the organization, any such wrong configuration or any such missed step could itself become a problem for the I mean, it could create a vulnerability for the organization. So while the sophistication of attacks is real and it is here and now, the fact remains that the organization still has to build the framework to be able to address that. So the concept, what I'm trying to convey through all this is, cloud is not security is not somebody else's responsibility. It is shared, and the organization has the primary role to play. And Gartner conveys this by saying 95% of the challenges happen because of the challenge with the company, not with the provider. So that's the point.
Excellent. I think you very well covered it in four parts. What's the responsibility of the service provider? What's the responsibility of an organization? Within organization, what's the responsibility of the users? And also, how not to deal with security and how not to leave loopholes. Plays a very pivotal role in ensuring that your infrastructure cloud infrastructure remains secure. Excellent. So let's move on to the next question. For the organizations, how important is it to know that their cloud provider security foothold? Is it not true that while a service provider can ensure the security of the infrastructure that it is providing, while the security of the data is still the responsibility of the organization which is using it? How does one secure the data in the cloud, the workloads, the applications?
So once again, shared responsibility, it is important that the organization realizes that they define how this cloud security is defined and how the data is going to be accessed. And since you asked about the data residency as well as the privacy requirements for the data are going to be defined by the organization's policy. How much, how far, how much, and what type of access do you want to give every user is defined by the organization based on its own security policy. And the classification of such data to be able to give the right kind of access to the respective users is also defined by such a policy. Then data at rest, in flight, or in use, how is it being secured or maybe encrypted or maybe moved across different devices is again another element that has to be defined by the organization security policy. So broadly speaking, every element of what you consider on data has to be defined by the organization security posture and in terms of the compliance that the organization has to have. That's the first part. The second one, you asked about the service providers foothold. Now, inadvertently over a period of time, what has happened is with the implementation of every part of the cloud in bits and parts, what has happened, each one comes with a set of tools, each one comes with a set of resources that they use, and each one comes with its own set of technologies. Now, for example, when you buy an end user, there is an end user detection and response solution. And then when you buy some SaaS application, it comes with certain set of tools. When you buy a public cloud infrastructure, that comes with another set of tools. But where is the broader vision that is going to put all this together? And that is where they partner with their own capability, as well as the organization, the way they define it, together need to come up with a broader vision. And that's where someone who's able to piece all these together, not as individual fragments, but overall as the cloud security posture becomes extremely important. And today we've graduated from what used to be called as MSSP to what we now call the managed detection and response, where it's not so much about reactive answering a particular vulnerability, but it is about proactively being able to manage the threat management first, and then the threat detection and response. And how do you build it all into one single response and remediation for the organization? And that's where the partner's ability and the technological capability that they bring to the table becomes extremely important, because it is more about being able to predict where the next attack is going to come from and be prepared to answer that. And more importantly, once you do the remediation this time, how do you bring that back into the automation so that the repeat occurrence of that into the future is adequately handled and responded to?
So a supplementary question to it is, when an organization is participating or working with an MSSP or a cloud service, a cloud security service provider, what comes handy as an information? What should the organization look for in the cloud security service provider?
Okay, there are two parts to this. The first one is, what does the cloud services provider, whether it is an infrastructure provider or a SaaS provider, what do they provide as a baseline along with what they deliver to the organization? Like I mentioned before, an infrastructure services provider gives only the infrastructure layer security, layer 2. But what you need is probably a layer 7 application level view of what is happening. So first of all, what is there is something that needs to be understood. Second is, many of these providers will come back and say, look, these technologies are available. But availability is one thing, using it is another. So having it in the marketplace or having it in a set of selectable options is one thing, but is it being adequately implemented? That's the second part. The third one is, this organization might themselves have some security services provider already, or they may be working with some level of security operations. Now, the technologies that these cloud providers bring in, along with the tools and technologies that they are already using, do they talk to each other to be able to provide the right kind of security posture that you need? Or do you have to fill up the blanks? If that be so, then do you have the right kind of APIs that are able to link and get the right kind of log sources and be able to understand what is happening, be able to respond to those threats, is something that needs to be identified. So I would classify this into these three parts. First, what is there? Second, what is available and needs to be implemented? Third, what do I already use and how do I integrate what comes along with that by way of either a direct integration, as in being able to talk to it, or have the right kind of APIs with which I'm able to structure the response.
Excellent. So, Sridhar, you have been, a very pioneering executive in the space of information and cybersecurity, and you have seen all the kinds of shifts that have taken place. The security risk being faced by a data center or networks entirely change when the applications actually move to the cloud. Um, and what should be the strategy of an organization to manage the security risks while moving to the cloud? Because in most instances, there is a lift and shift kind of migration happening to the cloud rather than only born in the cloud companies taking place.
Right. So as you move the applications to the cloud, one of the most important thing is the risk tolerance of the application itself. How do you want to define the risk addressal for those applications? That's the first part. The second is, as you migrate to the cloud, like I mentioned before, there are too many independent islands of activity because there are devices. And with the devices, there are certain security tools, starting from a simple antivirus to be able to manage the EDR requirements. And then there could be, and security industry is today so wide that there are too many small players and too many independent technologies available to address every single part of these challenges. So, like I mentioned, there is a device, and then comes, let's say, an EDR. And as you look at it further, then comes the identity. And now comes the network traffic management, the network related controls that are required, the network security that is supposed to be put in. And then comes today what Gartner calls a part of all these put together, they call as SASE, which is secure access safe edge. How do you define that for your organization as you build more? And next comes, earlier we had this concept of trust and verify. Today, it's about zero trust. Zero trust is a given. Zero trust is the foundation mandate today. How do you transition from a trust and verify environment to a zero trust infrastructure, to a zero trust network access, is something that's paramount as you move to the cloud, because it's not one single place, it is not one single network, and it is not one single infrastructure, right? So as you begin to build on that, then comes data management. And then we look at how do we get the applications and the data to reside in the right places to meet the compliance requirements. So each and every one of these parameters are to be considered as the design elements. And I would believe every organization will think that as long as it was with my data center, I was able to handle the security in a certain manner. How am I going to handle it in the cloud? So they're looking for equal, if not better, kind of a security posture. So designing something bottoms up for the cloud or for a hybrid kind of an environment, which is capable of handling, for example, cloud instances, as well as, for example, the data center environment that a customer might continue to have. For example, banks, they're not going to move their core banking infrastructure in a hurry to any form of cloud. So which means there is necessarily a coexistence of your data center as well as the cloud. So in such hybrid environments, which I think is going to be the normal for the world, how do we handle the security across these two elements? And then how do these talk to each other with the right kind of tools architecture? And that's where the provider's capability, like I mentioned before, comes into very, very high level of importance.
So, do you also think, this is another supplementary question, do you also think that while these applications are being ported onto the cloud, moved into the cloud, the application architecture also has to undergo some changes?
Absolutely. We move from a traditional design to what we call as containerization. And as you move towards such kind of a microservices architecture, it's not just the DevOps implementation, but the DevSecOps in terms of bringing the security for that also becomes extremely important. And when most of your applications move with Kubernetes implementation or any form of containerization, then naturally the security there becomes very, very important, because that's going to be the new architecture which provides the uniform experience for the user across your own platforms as well as the cloud platforms, right? So naturally that becomes very important.
Yeah, that was important for me to know. Thank you very much. Um, you know, Another very important aspect of cloud security or security as a whole is the identity and access management part of it, which plays a key role when it comes to accessing of critical business data. While cloud vendors will provide native access control tools that only allow access to sanctioned users, allowed users, including the identity management, authorization, and authentication protocols. Do you think they are enough, or do you think something else is required? Does a managed security approach work well in this case?
Okay. I think you might have read it before. Gartner calls identity as the new perimeter. Gone are the days when you were able to define your perimeter by way of how your infrastructure was defined or how your infrastructure was designed at that point of time. It's no more the endpoint, because the endpoint could be from any network. So automatically, what determine, and it could be any endpoint. Today, I use maybe 2 or 3 devices to log into my organization's network. It could be my personal PC, it could be my phone, it could be my laptop, right? So what defines my access is the identity. So identity is defined as the new perimeter. And you're going to have multiple instances across the cloud. So there is going to be, for example, your own data center, or it could be a co-located data center elsewhere. There is going to be probably some IaaS services that is leveraged from a public cloud provider. There is going to be a SaaS service that is leveraged from somewhere else. Now, what brings all these threads together is the identity, and that's where your need to access the cloud as well as the need to access your private infrastructure becomes important. And then the balance between how do you want to have the two is determined by your internet access and no more with the point to point links, right? And hence your traditional VPN is trust and verify, and it allows you access into the infrastructure. It is like your identity badge in the office, right? Earlier we could just take the access and go inside, but today even within my office, I don't have access to the server room. I don't have access to the safe vault rooms. So like that, defining which is the kind of access that you would want to provide is created in your Active Directory design. And the SaaS providers, for example, in Office 365, it is being used, or if it is a Salesforce.com, they begin to mirror the identity as defined by your Active Directory system. That means the user's access from which device to what level of access for the data, and do they have edit rights or do they have only access rights? Or if the same user is using the home PC, for example, should you allow the person to edit? Should you allow the person to download? Should you allow the person to replicate? Probably the only thing that you cannot control is somebody takes a screen grab of what is there on their phone. Maybe we'll find some technology soon for that as well. But otherwise, identity today defines exactly what can you provide as the access control. And more importantly, when you look at how do you manage it, the visibility required across the entire infrastructure of all the applications, of all the devices, and of all the infrastructure elements, other network, etc., to be to come to your through your log sources into your SIM tool is determined by this identity only, because you can monitor your user behavior as well as user entity behavior from the way you design your SIM services. So putting all these together, identity becomes the foundation element.
You mentioned in the very beginning of your answer, you mentioned that Gartner defines identity as the new perimeter. Don't you think that when we have spread ourselves too thin, especially with the remote workforce and distributed workforce, uh, establishing the authenticity of the user has become a challenge? Has it?
The authentication of the user happens only from the their identity and their access control as you define in the infrastructure. So recognizing the user and monitoring what the user is doing is well integrated into the security policy. And how do you allow the cloud access? Let's say you have the right kind of CASB solution. Then what sort of access do you provide for the user is also defined from there, and the policy implementation happens from there. So it's a combination of technologies that's going to support you in being able to answer this. And how you design that is what matters.
Great. So that brings me to the last question, but a very important one. As a managed security service provider, what are your key strategic inputs to the CISOs and the CIOs when they migrate to the cloud or implement it for the first time? And especially, during these challenging times, we saw a lot of quick migrations happening in a jiffy, which might have gone wrong, in some way or the other.
I would suggest a few things. Firstly, define a security posture that is desired for the organization and identify the right kind of partner who will be able to give you the threat management, detection, and response as is required for today's environment. Along with that, be able to assess and handle the required vulnerability assessment and vulnerability management that is required for the organization, and be able to handle the diverse elements that are a part of the overall design are important. One. Second is the security deployment and configuration. As the organization begins to consume from the diverse different sources, be able to stitch them through a single thread as you consume from different sources, but be able to put them all and manage the rights, the user controls, the remediation actions, as well as the threat intelligence sources integrated into one single set of logs, and be able to act on them. That becomes important. And lastly, identify the right kind of governance model that is required and the compliance that you need to adhere to for the respective industries, and being able to define that and work with the right kind of partner who is not only able to act on the security threats that the organization has got, but be able to provide you the right kind of governance model which is capable of getting automated and implemented and giving you the right kind of compliance is very, very key. So I would think of these three elements.
Thank you very much, Sridhar. As in the beginning, I said that cloud has become a very critical component of technology stack, technology infrastructures that businesses are looking for, towards attaining growth. Also, as the workforce has now become very distributed, most of the people are working remotely, and the next generation technologies and initiatives such as digital business, customer intimacy, and artificial intelligence play a greater role. I think cloud implementations will be considered as strategic to an organization, but at the same time, organizations which are planning to embark on the journey to the cloud or cloud migration should actually gain a very clear understanding of the process which is involved in it, specifically about the security posture of your organization before you move into the cloud. It was a pleasure speaking to you, Sridhar. Thank you very much for your great inputs.
Thank you for the opportunity, Rahul. Thank you very much. Nice talking to you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.